Welcome to Culture and Causation. I'm your host, Aaron Briley, and today we have someone that I'm very excited to interview. My guest today is Taleeb Starkes. Now, Mr. Starkes grew up in Philadelphia and has worked with and mentored at-risk inner-city youth. From his childhood in public housing, Mr. Starkes has become a very successful public intellectual, a documentarian, a cultural analyst, a podcast host, and a #1 Amazon bestselling author of Black Lives Matter, Why Lives Matter to the Race Grievance Industry. His PragerU video titled The Top 5 Issues Facing Black Americans has over 12 million views on PragerU's website and another 6.6 million views on YouTube. So we have so much to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to this interview. Taleeb, welcome to the show.
Hey, Aaron, thanks, man. It's an honor to be a part of this building process.
Great, thank you so much. So you lived in public housing in your childhood, and you went on to become, at least in my opinion, this amazingly successful cultural commentator. And so I'm just really curious, how did you avoid some of the pitfalls that most people face? Was there anything that comes to mind from your upbringing that allowed you to avoid some of these pitfalls?
Yeah, I would say I was fortunate in the sense that I grew up in a time where your neighborhood was still neighborly, and when people saw certain things in you, they tend to try to steer you onto that path as opposed to letting you run astray. And so, yeah, it was public housing, but and I did go left sometimes when I should have went right, but I didn't go far left. I kind of knew that I had certain abilities that my friends didn't have. When they had certain abilities that I didn't have, but they chose to use theirs in a way that was, let's say, conducive to survival.
Okay.
Whereas they knew that I may have been probably one of the most learned, as far as not even college or anything, but just as far as I gravitated towards learning, watching documentaries, reading. And
Yeah.
so I was the guy they would rely on to answer certain questions about black nationalism, because growing up in black nationalism and the projects that's just what it is. You're going to be a follower of someone speaking Black Power. We're in this project is actually a project for this greater experimentation to keep Black people subservient. So I went through that school, and I was pretty learned and with those talking points. So I have friends who went to jail or done wrong, and they tried to keep me off of that path. Even though by trying to keep me off, I wanted more, because I'm like, hey, you guys are doing pretty well for yourselves. Some new cars, shoes, clothes. You know, Fortunately, I didn't have a problem with the ladies, or I probably would have indulged more with the other side, because that's part of the package deal when you're making money. The ladies seem to gravitate towards you, but and also my mother. My mother. I mean, honestly, I gotta say that I'm the man that my mother made me to be, and unfortunately, that um, unfortunately that aspect of growing up in public housing is a detriment more times than not. I feel like I was lucky, and she was the one who wouldn't tolerate less than your best. So without her instilling those values in me, I think I would have been I would have been more susceptible to the gravitational pull of the hood than what I was.
You had this natural interest in learning more, and you had this intellectual curiosity at a young
Sure.
age, and you saw this at a young age, and it's something you saw that was different from other people. So how did you get into writing? Did you write when you were young? Were you always like a scribbler here and there, or was there one event that then said, you know what, I want to be a writer? Like, how did that come
That's
about?
that's a good question, because I was more so a reader than a writer. But I remember in high school, a teacher said to me, "Hey, you ever thinking about writing as a profession?" And really, when the teacher said that, it just went over me, because I thought, how you can't make money writing? You know, this, no, no, I would never do that. Well, not never, but I'm just dismissed it because I'm thinking, sounds like it's not, the money doesn't come fast enough by doing anything like that. And I'm just writing. I'm not Ernest Hemingway. But after high school, I went to Cheney University for a bit. I didn't graduate. I went to the Cheney University, which is in Pennsylvania, one of the oldest HBCUs in the country, if not the oldest. And I remember in a writing class, we will write on a topic the teacher gives us, the professor gives us. Mm-hmm. And we turn it in, and then maybe the next day, he'll give us our papers, and I will always hear people go, man, I got a C or I got a D. I spent all night writing. And I would hear that over and over. And then he was a white professor, and I started hearing, he must be a racist because nobody is, what'd you get? And I hear them talking to each other. What'd you get? I got a C. What'd you get? Well, I got a D. Well, I got a B. And people were becoming disgruntled with the professor. But I was getting A's and B's. And I would hear them say, he's racist. He got to be racist. Why is he? Nobody's doing well in this class. And you know, I was just in my little corner looking at my paper like, I'm doing okay. But even so, I still didn't take that as I didn't take that as some type of harbinger of what I would do. So it ultimately started when I was started working at the group home with young juvenile delinquents and dependents, where I became so frustrated with what I was seeing in the city and around the country, the same pattern of behavior, the same murder, killed over sneakers and glasses. And I started writing down my angst. It was like bottled frustration. And I just started writing. And lo and behold, I said, wow, I may be onto something. So a friend of mine, he's into film, and we created a documentary called Mothers of No Tomorrow, which is centered around this, what we call a sorority that mothers don't want to join. And it's by losing their kids to urban violence. Mm-hmm. So I started writing for that, about just this carnage that's happening in these inner cities. And from that documentary, Mothers of No Tomorrow, I kept writing. And I said, you know what? I'm going to put this into a book form. Mm. And so that was the beginning of writing into book form after that documentary.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's really cool. Actually, that leads me to my next. It's a nice segue into my next point. So it's interesting. So you really got into this it was almost born out of frustration, it seems like. I mean, you were in this in this place where you were just so frustrated, you had to put some ideas down, and then that turned into a documentary, which then turned into a book. And you've now written 3 books, as far as I have here.
Yeah.
I have The Uncivil War, I have Black Lives Matter, and The Gospel of Nisus.
Yes.
And so is there a common theme throughout the books? I mean, it seems like there could be at least one theme that I see, that something like, because there's a lot of dishonesty. Like, if we don't take an honest look at the problems in the Black community, we will never overcome them. Because it seems like in Uncivil War, there's people aren't sort of recognizing or don't want to see these different subcultures. Black Lives Matter, you know, I think there's a lot of dishonesty and deception there. And the Gospel of Nisus also touches on some dishonesty. So would you call that a theme, or is there something else a theme? Is there something else that you would say is a theme?
No, you hit it. That's the common thread. Is that all of these are pretty much books of a series. And I don't have a name of the series actually, but I just know that this is like a part 1, part 2, part 3. And the third book is really, honestly, the third book is just more so me with the Colin Kaepernick, his position and the people, his enablers. I just took a shot at them with that book. But okay. Yeah, the first book is pretty much me talking about this sociopathic subculture that exists within the Black community that we will not chastise, we will not excommunicate, if I may. We will keep making excuses for them, and meanwhile, they're not making excuses for us. They're just making things more bloody, costly, and troublesome. So I wanted to point out that in that book, and then I evolved. You know, you know, if you get from the first book, my language, you can just feel how angry I was. And the second book, it was more or less political, where I started calling out the Democratic Party and its part in this process, or this cesspool that I believe we exist in.
Okay.
And with the Democratic Party, I talked about some of their allies. I went at them more in this book than the last book. And again, the third book was just me versus Colin Kaepernick.
Okay. I want to talk about your PragerU video where you discuss the 5 issues facing Black Americans. But can you explain what number 5 is? So you call number 5 the victim mentality. And how is that a problem with inner city communities?
Well, because racial victimhood, I believe, is part of is a major tool used to keep us where we are. And that is to say, whatever happens to you is not your fault. So go ahead and just live willy-nilly. Don't take any responsibilities for your actions, because we have this card that we can say, the victim card, and say, here, use this at any time, and it'll explain why your failures are your failures. But in that video, I mean, we had to edit it for time, but I also mentioned that victimhood is probably even more dangerous than the actual hood. You know, there's 2 hoods that I grew up in. The physical hood, where you got the dilapidated houses, you got the crime, you know, poverty, and then there's the victimhood, which to me is probably much more lasting, because wherever you go, you see yourself as a victim, and if you see yourself as a victim, then you'll never take control of your circumstances. So I think that the victimhood mentality is I think that's a major setback for us. So that's why that was number 5.
The 4th issue that you say you think is a major obstacle to these communities is a lack of diversity. And can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, the lack of diversity of thought, and it ties into so many things. You can think of that politically. You can kind of think of it religiously. You can think of that as speaking well, you know, talking properly.
Yeah.
And all of those things can get you can get you looked at in a funny way, or get you name called, or get you stepped on because you said, you know what, I only speak one language, English, so I'm going to try to speak it the best that I can, you know. And you do that, then you be accused of talking white. You know, if you can say, you know what, we've all voted Democrat. I'm going to go ahead and see what these Republicans are doing, because, you know, what do we got to lose? As Donald Trump said. But you can't do that. You know, all of a sudden you're a Klan supporter if you decide you want to step outside of the box. Even if you decide, you know what, I want to be a libertarian. You know, I was a registered libertarian, and I would go to vote, and I would see people look down at the sheet and look up at me, down at the sheet as if, like, what is this?
Is this a
What
mistake?
Yeah, what is maybe they didn't make this L into a D all the way. Let me help you out and just make the loop.
Yeah.
So you're in a polling place and you got people looking strangely. So it's if you're not part of the mob, this mob mentality of that exists in our community, then man, you might get ostracized. I mean, you likely will get ostracized. So I say in the video, I talk about how certain figures that I didn't know growing up, like I didn't know of a Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams or Shelby Steele. I didn't know of those guys, but I knew of a Jackson, I knew of a Sharpton, and I bet you kids nowadays know more of a Ta-Nehisi Coates and a Sean King
Mhm.
than they do of a Walter Williams or a Thomas Sowell. And that's deliberately done, even in this information age, where being ignorant is a choice, I believe. But
Yeah.
even now, you want those guys, those alternative thinkers won't be uh, they won't be front and center as your Sharptons, your Sean Kings, and your other D Rays, those guys. So diversity of thought, I think, is detrimental.
Okay, so number three now, urban terrorism. And so can you explain what you mean by urban terrorism and why you think this is a detriment to these communities?
Sure, it's very simplistic. The term urban terrorism. I mean, you got one, the urban area, and two are these career criminals who terrorize the community, and they terrorize the community in many ways, directly,
Mhm.
indirectly, and then they'll do something like, "Hey, how about we have a turkey giveaway?" With the drug dealers. We have a turkey giveaway
Mhm.
to find favor, to give back this one day, and then 364 other days that is back to business.
Okay.
And so they basically they terrorize the community. Philadelphia, even now during in this pandemic, is has the second highest homicide rate amongst big cities, even
Wow.
in the pandemic. And to add to that, Milwaukee's the county executive of Milwaukee just had a press conference maybe a week and a half ago, where he declared the two major pandemics that's facing the residents in Milwaukee. Number one, of course, is COVID,
Mhm.
and number two is racism. And that always chokes me when I hear these guys in these chocolate cities pretend that racism really is the main problem in those areas.
Your second issue is single motherhood.
Right.
And can you discuss that briefly?
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, I'm from a single parent home, and I believe that I don't want to say I'm an exception because I've done things. I've been arrested, um, but that is not the formula for success in this country. A matriarch, a matriarchy doesn't work, and you've seen, and the numbers bear out in the video. It shows a show where how the decline happened from the '60s
Mhm.
when we used to be, and Walter Williams talks about this in detail. When the patriarchy existed in the Black community, our community was on par, if not achieving higher than the white community.
Mhm.
And with these single and what I and again working in the group homes, the boys came from these single parent homes, and I got to see firsthand. And I grew up around it, so I
Mhm.
was these experiences were familiar. They just reinforced what I knew because I was looking at things. I had an eagle's perspective, looking down, as opposed to being the worm, where I
Yeah.
just was focused, on the ground. And I was looking at things from the eagle's perspective, and I've seen how these mothers were not their mothers; they were friends. They would talk to their mothers like girlfriends
Mhm.
almost. Why didn't you bring me this? And you knew I need new shoes or sneakers. Now we're in a group home. And so talking back, cursing, and that pattern um, was the dominant one in that area. But when the father would come around every once in a while, and God knows when the father came, I was like a social scientist watching just to see my theory. To me, it was a theory
Yeah.
because I knew, like, well, if I can do it, other people can do it. I mean, if I came from these situations, other people, and it's true, other people can.
Yeah.
However, I wanted to see how the dynamic changed when the father came around, and all 9 times out of 10, the father was more, the child listened more so than spoke when the father was around.
Mhm.
He
That's
was
so
waiting for instruction as opposed to wanting to give instruction
yeah.
when the father was around. And these would be dads that weren't they didn't grow up in the same household with these guys, but just their mere presence was enough for the kid to go, my dad came to see me. And, and I remember that growing up. My dad would come to drive up and pick me up for a weekend. And, other kids would look like I just got picked up by Santa Claus. That's that's how rare fathers were in the community.
Right.
So, but they're important, man. The nuclear family is essential to positive development in our kids. Yeah.
Okay, and the last one here. So I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to wrap up here really soon, but I just want to finish off with the last one, and then I maybe have one more follow-up question after that. The number one issue on your PragerU video was the allegiance to liberal policies. Can you maybe in a sentence or two explain that?
Sure. Now the reason why that's number one is because if you look at the entire list of issues, they're all exasperated by this one entity.
I see.
So without this one entity being over top of the whole, not looking down, and providing the fodder that's needed for these instances, these circumstances to exist, I think we would be, they wouldn't exist, at least to the degree that they do. If you got a party that rewards single parenthood, and you got a party that says, yeah, I understand that you committed that crime, but you suffering from post-traumatic slavery disorder. If you got, if you got someone, and they say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to let you out again from jail. Don't do it again or again, so when you have this party that keeps enabling all of this, the mayhem and misery, they get the blame overall. But it could be argued that the single parent household, that was initially on my original list, that was number one. And then before time passed and I figured out, wait a minute, all of these things wouldn't exist without them pushing it on us, without them creating the conditions.
I think they do provide some incentives, and they incentivize some of these bad behaviors. But this actually leads to my next question. I think I'll end with this because I think we're essentially out of time. What do you think needs to be done in order to make the biggest impact?
The cure to me is the culture. And again, it goes back to, and I don't want to, I'm not saying this in a political way when I say that conservative versus liberal. I want to conflate the two and make it seem like I'm being political here, but I do believe that the conservatism, like days of old, has been the best way. And really the black community is ultimately conservative. But when you add the political angle where conservative equals Republican, then that's where it becomes convoluted. And, black people are like, oh no, I don't want to be associated with, and that goes back to the diversity of thought, but that's another thing. Okay. But yeah, as long as conservatism is correlate with Republican, the black community overall is saying we don't want any parts of it. However, it is conservatism that will be the saving grace. The two-parent household, the save your money, clean yourself up, and I'll grab yourself by the bootstraps, or if not the bootstraps, your Air Jordans. Pick yourself up by Air Jordans. Nowadays, simple things that a parent would tell their child.
Yeah.
And so yeah. So in a nutshell, I would say is the culture. We definitely have to change the culture and get back to what we did that worked before. People dressed a certain way. When they went out the house, they knew how to speak. Children knew how to speak to adults. Yeah. School wasn't a daycare. It was actually a place to increase your learning. Socialization skills happen there as well. So yeah. So conservatism, Aaron, that would be my final answer.
So I guess the last question then is, where can people find you? What's the best way on social media or otherwise that people can find your work and to listen to what you have to say?
Well, yeah, I'm horrible on social media, but on Twitter at Taleeb Starkes is probably the best.
Okay.
Because if I do get online, it's pretty much to see what's happening on Twitter every now and then. So yeah, at Taleeb Starkes on Twitter, and all of my work can be found on Amazon. And thanks for people who support, man. Because I got to say, Aaron, basically I wrote these books that I wanted to read, and then come to find out, other people wanted to read them as well. So I'm just grateful that people are appreciating my work, and even if you don't appreciate it, you took a chance to see at least what I was talking about, and that's all I can ask for. And I meet people like you along the way, and this is a great journey.
Well, I just want to say I definitely appreciate your work, and thank you so much for coming on the show. And one more thing too, I think, which needs to be said, and maybe we can talk about this in a part two. But I mean, it takes a lot of courage, I think, to write on these issues, especially in the current state of the culture, where I'm sure you're getting pushback, you're getting hate mail, you're getting hate tweets, and all these things, and yet you're still pushing forward with the message because you believe in it. So. Yeah, thank you so much, Taleeb, for your work. Thank you for your courage, and hopefully we can do it again pretty soon.
Yes, sir. All right, Aaron, take care.